At 8:47 p.m. at a grand gala, my son stepped onto the stage in front of more than 600 people. He smiled, took the microphone, and said, "I want everyone here to understand something about my father." At that exact moment, I saw my daughter-in-law signal the camera crew to zoom in on my face, waiting for me to break. They thought tonight would turn me into a helpless old man, but in my jacket pocket was a sealed envelope from my late wife and a truth powerful enough to destroy the entire family. I'm so grateful you're here. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from. Your city, your state, your country, I want to know. It means everything to see this community come together from so many places. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the message it carries is one worth keeping. January 24th, 2026. 8:47 p.m., Savannah, Georgia. I've been to a lot of rooms in my life. Boardrooms with 40-foot tables and men who smelled like old money. Hospital waiting rooms that smelled like nothing at all, which was somehow worse. And the kitchen of our old house on Abercorn Street, the one Eleanor filled with lily-scented candles because she said the South needed more light. But this room, the grand hall of the Savannah Heritage Arts Center, draped in navy and amber, every chandelier burning, like it had something to prove, this room felt like standing inside a held breath. I was 63 years old. I had built a company from a folding table in my garage. I had buried my wife. I had done hard things. And yet, sitting in that front row seat with a glass of water I hadn't touched, I could feel my hand shaking. Not trembling, shaking. The kind of shake your body does when your mind already knows what's coming but hasn't told your chest yet. The mic at the podium let out a low, crackling hiss. Somewhere to my left, a camera operator shifted his rig, the little red recording light blinking steady as a heartbeat. I noticed Scott Avery, Nathan's producer, a man with a smile that never reached his eyes, standing just off stage, one hand pressed flat against his earpiece. Nathan was already up there. My son, 38 years old in a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, holding the microphone, the way a man holds something he's decided belongs to him. He looked out at the crowd. 600 people, maybe more. Donors, board members, city officials, journalists with their little notebooks and their hungry eyes. And then his gaze moved just for a second to me. I've known that look my whole life. I watched it grow from the face of a boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives into the face of whatever he had become. Cold, exact, measuring. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket without thinking. My fingers found the edge of the envelope, thick paper, a silver wax seal that Maggie Cole had pressed herself 3 days ago. It felt heavier than it had any right to feel, like holding a loaded thing you hope you never have to use. From the wings, I caught a flicker of movement. Celeste. My daughter-in-law, in a black dress the color of a threat, was leaning toward Scott. She raised 2 fingers and mouthed something I couldn't hear. Later, I would learn the words were amber cut. A production signal. It meant zoom in tight on the old man's face the moment he breaks. Nathan inhaled. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when they sense blood in the water. "I want everyone here tonight to understand something," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "About my father." The audio cut. Not the whole system, just those 2 words. A half-second of static, like the building itself flinched. But I heard them. Every single person in that room heard them. And I thought, here we go. 10 days earlier, I was crouched on the floor of a stranger's living room, trying to get a small silver device to snap cleanly into the wall mount without stripping the plastic. "You don't have to do that yourself, you know," said Mrs. Dorothy Lane from her armchair. She was 78, lived alone in a house that smelled like peppermint tea and the kind of medicated cream that old houses seem to generate on their own. The TV was on low, a weather forecast, a cold front moving up from the Gulf. "I know," I said, "but the screws always strip when the delivery guys do it. You sound like my late husband." "I'll take that as a compliment." She laughed, soft and real. I got the device locked in and straightened up, pressing one hand to my lower back because 63 is 63 no matter who you are. The device was one of ours, a Whitfield Safe Care fall detection sensor, roughly the size of a deck of cards. It connected to a monitoring service that would alert emergency contacts within 90 seconds of a detected fall. Simple technology, but the kind that had already saved, by our last count, over 400 lives in the state of Georgia alone. Mrs. Lane reached out and touched my wrist. Her hand was papery and warm. "You're a good man," she said. "I hope your family knows that." I smiled and said, "They do." But I was looking out her window at the bare January yard, and I was thinking about Eleanor, about how she used to say that the real measure of a man wasn't what he built, but who he remembered to take care of along the way. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Maggie Cole, attorney at law, calling from her downtown office. "Give me 1 second," I told Mrs. Lane, stepping into the hallway. "Thomas." Maggie's voice was even the way it always was, like a doctor delivering results. "Gala's next week. Do you want me to bring the full trust packet, or just the activation clause?" I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment. "Bring the full packet," I said. "But I hope to God we don't need it." "Noted." A pause. "You doing all right?" "I'll let you know in a week." She hung up without saying goodbye, which was her way of saying she understood. I walked back into the living room, helped Mrs. Lane adjust the sensor's alert volume, and said my goodbyes. I was almost to my car when my phone buzzed again. A text this time, from Nathan. "Dad, heads up, there's going to be media at the gala next week. Full coverage. Don't show up early, it'll just create complications." I stood there in Mrs. Lane's driveway, reading that word. Complications. In 30 years of building a company, I had never once been called a complication. I drove home. I went straight to the cabinet in my bedroom, the old oak one Eleanor picked out at an estate sale in Tybee Island, the one that still smelled faintly like her perfume if you opened it slowly enough. I pulled open the inner drawer and set my hand on a wooden box, dark and smooth, the corners worn soft from years of being moved and opened and held. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's handwriting, and beneath it, a sealed envelope, the kind a trust attorney prepares for contingencies. I didn't open either one that night. I just needed to know they were still there. Nah. I was not there for this. I only know it happened because of what came after. But I've thought about it enough times that I can almost smell the river air, almost hear the ice shift in the glasses on the rooftop bar above Congress Street. Celeste was there with Scott Avery. She wore a coat the color of a bruise and held a glass of red wine she barely touched, which was the thing about Celeste. She always looked like she was drinking, but she rarely did. She was too careful for that. Scott leaned back in his chair, one ankle crossed over his knee, the way men do when they think they've already won something. "The optics on the quilt are good," he said. "The elderly safety angle plays well. Warm, responsible, all that." He swirled his drink. "But it centers the father, and that's the problem." Celeste tilted her head. "It won't be a problem after next week. Walk me through it again." She set her glass down with a precise little click. "The narrative is simple. Nathan is the visionary. Thomas is the past. If we can document on live camera a moment where Thomas looks diminished, confused, emotional, in the wrong direction." She paused. "It doesn't have to be a scandal. It just has to be a moment. People don't remember facts. They remember images. Scott nodded slowly. And the amber cut signal. I'll give it from the wings the second I see it on his face. You make sure the camera operator is ready for a close-up. Frame it from below if you can. It makes the subject look smaller. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to a contact, listed under a name that wasn't a real name. A journalist who owed her a favor, or more precisely, owed her silence on a matter that was better left unprinted. Teaser drops 48 hours before. Hold until I confirm the cut. She put the phone away and looked out at the dark river. Scott asked, "What if he doesn't react the way you're expecting?" Celeste picked up her wineglass again. "Everyone reacts," she said. "You just have to know which door to open." Gerald Harmon's study was the kind of room that was designed to make you feel small. Dark wood paneling, a whiskey collection, arranged by age, a desk the size of a small boat. The printer in the corner ran constantly, as if Gerald believed that a silent printer was an idle mind. I know this room because I sat in it once years ago when Nathan first brought Celeste home, and Gerald wanted to understand the family structure, which was his way of figuring out what he could eventually control. On the evening of January 17th, Nathan sat across from his father-in-law and said almost nothing. That was the point. Gerald spread 3 separate documents across the desk, what he called the 3-layer structure. The first layer was a network of vendor contracts, legitimate on their face, that routed payments through a series of small subcontractors. The second layer was where the real money moved, invoices for services that were partially fabricated, buried under enough paperwork that a casual audit would pass right over them. The third layer, what Gerald called Phase 2, was a secondary activation, a transaction, that would only initiate once a specific set of executive credentials were entered into the system. 186 million over 18 months. Gerald said, with the satisfaction of a man reading his own obituary and finding it impressive. By the time anyone traces it back, the trail ends at 3 shell entities incorporated in Delaware. Clean. Nathan nodded and adjusted the position of his phone on the desk. A small, almost imperceptible movement. The kind of thing you do when you want to make sure the microphone is facing the right direction. "And you're certain," Nathan said, his voice easy and unhurried, "that none of this loops back to me?" Gerald waved a hand. "Structurally impossible. Your name is 2 layers removed from anything actionable." "Good." Nathan glanced at his phone screen, dark, giving nothing away. "That's good." From his jacket pocket, Nathan's phone vibrated once. A message from Celeste. "Don't forget Gala night you cut him in front of the camera. That's the whole play." Nathan read it. He set the phone face down on his knee. He looked at his father-in-law, this man who had spent the last 40 minutes laying out in precise detail exactly how much he was willing to steal and exactly who he planned to protect. And he said nothing. He just let Gerald keep talking. Later, I would understand what Nathan was doing in that room. He wasn't learning. He wasn't agreeing. He was collecting. Every sentence Gerald spoke with confidence, every number he quoted, every structure he explained, Nathan was filing it away like evidence because that's exactly what it was going to become. At the end of the meeting, Gerald poured 2 glasses of bourbon and raised his. "To the next generation," he said. Nathan touched his glass to Gerald's and smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't involve the eyes. On the drive home, he said one sentence out loud to no one in particular, his voice quiet in the dark car moving through the Savannah streets. "If someone has to fall," he said, "it won't be me." He didn't know yet that the room had already decided otherwise. There are people in every company who see the thing nobody else wants to see. Amber Ross was one of those people. She was 29 years old, had a master's degree in financial forensics from Georgia State, and had been with us for 3 years. She wore her hair pulled back so tight, it looked like a decision. She ate lunch at her desk. She flagged things. That morning, she flagged something that made her stomach drop. She'd been running a routine vendor audit, the kind of low-glamour, high-importance work that most senior people delegated and most junior people resented. 3 new vendors had been added to the payment system in the past 6 weeks. Standard enough, except that when Amber pulled their registration details, something snagged. All 3 shared the same post office box in Chatham County. Different company names, different contact emails, but the same physical address, a UPS store on Abercorn Street that accepted commercial mail for a fee of $40 a month. She cross-referenced the invoices. Each one had been submitted just below the threshold that triggered a secondary approval. $49,800, $49,500, $49,750. Anything under $50,000 in a single transaction, cleared automatically with a single department head signature. Classic layering, she said out loud to no one because her cubicle neighbor had called in sick. She typed up a summary memo 2 pages clean, with the vendor registration numbers highlighted and a timeline of the invoice submissions attached, and sent it to her direct supervisor, a man named Dale Whitmore, who had worked in compliance for 20 years and had the energy of someone counting down to retirement. His reply came back in 11 minutes. Amber, not a priority this week. Focus on Gala prep documentation. We'll circle back. She stared at that email for a long time. Then she scrolled back through the system access logs, something she did automatically, the way some people check the weather, and saw something that made the back of her neck go cold. One of the flagged vendor files had been accessed at 11:47 p.m. 4 days ago. Not by her, not by Dale. The access came from a user account that was listed as active, but had no department assignment, no employee photo, and a creation date of just 9 days prior. A ghost account. She printed the log, folded it in half, and slipped it into the inside pocket of her blazer. She didn't know why she did that instead of saving it to a shared drive, but something told her that a shared drive was not a safe place. Her desk phone rang. Unknown extension. She picked up. Nothing. Just the soft hiss of an open line. And then before she could say anything a second time, a voice, flat, unhurried, and clearly disguised, said, "Don't dig deeper if you still want a job here." The line went dead. Amber set the receiver down very carefully, like it might shatter. Then she pulled the folded log back out of her pocket and read it again. She dug deeper. The lobby had been dressed up for the Gala preview shoot. A backdrop printed with the Winter Safety Night logo in navy and silver, a ring light on a tripod, a video camera on a shoulder rig. It smelled like fresh floor wax and someone's expensive cologne. I had been asked to come in for what Nathan called a few family shots for the program booklet. 20 minutes, he'd said. Easy. I should have known there's no such thing as easy when a camera crew is involved. Right here, Dad. Nathan put a hand on my shoulder and steered me to a spot 2 feet left of where I'd been standing. His grip was firm, professional, the kind of grip that doesn't feel like affection. "Sure," I said. He helped me into my jacket, a gesture that read beautifully on camera, I'm sure, and smiled at something just past my right ear. I glanced over. Scott Avery was behind the monitor watching the frame. "Great," Scott said. "Really natural. Can we get a little closer, shoulder to shoulder?" Nathan put his arm around me. I smiled because that's what you do when someone puts an arm around you and a camera is pointing at your face. But I was watching Nathan's eyes. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at the back of the room at something or someone I couldn't see without turning my head. His jaw was set, not tense, calculated. The difference between a man who's nervous and a man who's waiting for a cue. After the third take, Scott said, "Perfect, that's a wrap on the two-shot." And the camera operator started breaking down the rig. Nathan didn't move away immediately. He stayed beside me and in the easy offhand way of a man asking about the weather said, "Hey, the trust documentation, the voting structure. I heard there are some special provisions in there that most people don't know about." I turned to look at him. His expression was pleasant, relaxed, like he was asking me what I wanted for dinner. "Where'd you hear that?" I said. He shrugged. "Around. You know how it is." "I do," I said. We looked at each other for exactly 2 seconds. That was enough. Because I recognized the question for what it was, not curiosity, but confirmation. He already knew the answer. He just wanted to see if I'd lie. I didn't lie. I also didn't answer. I picked up my jacket from the chair and said, "You did good up there. Real natural." I walked out before he could read my face. Behind me, I heard Celeste's voice, low and close to Scott's ear. "Did you get the hands?" "Got them," Scott said. I didn't look back. But I knew what they'd gotten my hands slightly unsteady as I reached for my jacket. Just enough. Just what they needed. The thing about Frank Aldridge was that he was not a bad man. He had worked alongside me for 11 years. He knew the name of my wife. He had attended her funeral and wept in the back row, the kind of quiet, dignified grief that tells you a person was genuinely affected. He brought his daughter to the company picnic every summer. He coached youth baseball on weekends. He was not a bad man. He was a man with a sick wife, a mortgage he'd refinanced twice, and a prescription drug bill that had been quietly, steadily eating him alive for the past 2 years. Celeste knew this because Celeste made it her business to know things. She found him at his car on level B2, in the dead hour between the end of the workday and the time the garage cameras switched to low-resolution overnight mode. The fluorescent light above his parking space flickered every 4 seconds, which gave the whole scene the quality of a slow-motion nightmare. Frank heard her heels on the concrete before he saw her. "Celeste." He turned. His voice was careful. "I didn't know you were—" "I need 2 things from you," she said. "No greeting, no preamble. A copy of the internal audit flag that Amber Ross filed this morning, and Thomas's login credentials to the Legacy Trust portal." Frank stared at her. "I can't do that. That's a federal—" She held up her phone. On the screen was a photograph, a pharmacy receipt, a prescription bottle, and beside it, a stack of EOB documents, explanation of benefits forms, showing claims that had been routed through a company health reimbursement account for prescriptions that were technically not covered under the plan. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a smoking gun. But it was enough to trigger an HR investigation, enough to cost him his job, enough to make his wife's medical situation considerably, catastrophically worse. "I'm not asking you to hurt anyone," Celeste said. Her voice was smooth, almost kind, which was the worst part. "I just need 2 things. You give me those, I delete this photo, and we never have this conversation." Frank's hand was shaking against his car door. He looked at the photo. He looked at Celeste. He looked at the photo again. "If anyone finds out, nobody finds out," she said. "Unless you make that happen." He took the USB drive she was holding out to him. His fingers barely closed around it. The fluorescent light flickered again. In the half-second of darkness, Celeste turned and walked back toward the elevator. Without another word, her heels steady and deliberate on the concrete. The sound fading until the garage was just cold air and the distant hum of the ventilation system. Frank stood there for a long time, the USB drive sitting in his palm like a coal that hadn't started burning yet. I woke up at 5:30 that morning, which is what I do when something is wrong, and my body knows it before I do. By 6, I had coffee. By 6:15, I was at my kitchen table with my laptop open, going back through the access logs on our legacy document management system, the one that housed the older trust and governance files, the stuff that predated the cloud migration. Old school password protected, about as exciting to look at as a tax return. Except that at 11:47 p.m. 4 nights ago, someone had opened a file called EW-Trust-Provisions-2019-Final.pdf. Eleanor's Trust Provisions. I set down my coffee cup very slowly. I called Kevin Mercer, our head of IT security. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he was already at his desk, which told me he already knew something was off. "Kevin," I said, "the legacy portal. Someone accessed Eleanor's trust file 4 days ago at 11:47 p.m. Who was it?" A pause. Not the pause of a man who doesn't know. The pause of a man deciding how much to say. "The account that accessed it was created 9 days ago," Kevin said. "It's flagged as active in the system, but there's no employee record attached to it. No badge number, no department. A ghost account." "Yes, sir." I pushed back from the table and stood up. My kitchen felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "Can you trace who created it?" "We can try. But whoever set it up knew enough to route the creation request through an internal IT ticket that was approved by..." He stopped. "Say it, Kevin." "It was approved by Frank Aldridge." I stood there in my kitchen in the gray January light coming through the window above the sink, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not surprise. Something worse than surprise, the specific, nauseating weight of confirmation. Frank. 11 years. Youth baseball and the back row at Eleanor's funeral. "Don't touch the log," I said. "Don't move it. Don't archive it. Don't let anyone near it. Screenshot everything and send it to Maggie Cole's secure email. Nobody else." "Done," Kevin said. "There's one more thing." "Go ahead." "The hallway camera outside the records room. Night of the 20th. There's a figure on the footage." He paused. "It's not great resolution, but it's not nothing." I looked out my kitchen window at the bare oak tree in the backyard, the one Eleanor planted the year we bought the house. "Send it to Maggie," I said. "All of it." I hung up. I drank the rest of my coffee standing at the counter. It had gone cold. By 6 o'clock that evening, my phone had received 14 calls, 9 text messages, and 1 voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. The voicemail said in a voice I couldn't identify, "You should stay home on Gala night, for your own sake." I played it twice. Then I saved it and forwarded it to Maggie. The article that had gone up that afternoon on a local news blog, one of those outfits that called itself a digital media company but operated out of someone's spare bedroom, was titled "Safe Care's Silent Power Struggle Is the Founder a Liability." It was 300 words of implication dressed up as journalism. No named sources. Phrases like "insiders suggest" and "questions have been raised." A photo of me from a company event 2 years ago, slightly out of focus, which made me look confused when in reality, I had simply been turning to say something to Eleanor. Diana Moss, our CFO, a sharp, methodical woman who had joined us 4 years ago from a hospital network in Atlanta, called me at 6:21, and I could hear in her voice the particular strain of someone who has been managing bad news all day. "Thomas, I need you to know that Hartwell Partners called this afternoon," she said. Hartwell was one of our anchor institutional partners, the kind of relationship that had taken 6 years to build. They've seen the article. They want a call before the gala to understand the leadership picture. "Set it up," I said. "I already did. But Thomas..." She lowered her voice even though she was alone in her office. They used the word optics twice. I know what that means. I know you do. I just want you to know I think this is manufactured. The timing is too clean. She paused. Someone sent this story. Someone with access. I know that too, I said. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes. The January dark had come down hard and fast the way it does in Savannah in winter, and the streetlight at the end of the block cast everything in a flat sodium yellow that made the neighborhood look like an old photograph. I thought about Eleanor, about the trust provisions she had written with Maggie 3 years before she died, in the quiet, practical way she did everything not out of fear but out of clarity. She had understood even then that love and governance were not the same thing. You can love someone completely, she had told me once, and still not hand them a loaded weapon. I started the car and drove inside. I heard it before I saw it. A window in the back hallway, the one with the old latch that I'd been meaning to replace for 2 winters, was not quite closed. Cold air moved through the gap with a low, persistent whisper, and the smell that came with it was wrong, damp concrete and outdoor cold inside a house that should have been sealed and warm. I stood in the hallway and listened for 30 seconds. Nothing moved. No sound except the refrigerator hum and that slow breath of outside air. I went to the bedroom. The oak cabinet was open. The inner drawer had been pulled out and set crookedly on the floor as if someone had yanked it in a hurry. The wooden box, Eleanor's box, was gone. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking, and I didn't try to stop them this time. There was no camera here. There was no one to perform steadiness for. I sat there for what felt like a long time. Then I called Kevin Mercer. "Someone came into my house tonight," I said. "They took the wooden box from the cabinet in my bedroom." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "I'll pull the exterior camera on your block," he said. "Give me 10 minutes. While I waited, I looked around the room. The drawer had been placed on the floor rather than thrown deliberate, not panicked. The latch on the hallway window had been depressed from the outside, which required either a tool or knowledge of exactly how that old latch worked. The rest of the room was untouched. Not a burglary. A retrieval. Kevin called back in 8 minutes. "Got something," he said. "Exterior cam from your neighbor across the street. A figure in dark clothing in and out in under 4 minutes. But Thomas..." He stopped. "What?" "They parked under the streetlight. They didn't disable the camera. They didn't even try to hide their face from the angle across the street. They just kept it turned away." He paused. "Someone who knew what they were doing would have checked the sightlines. This person either didn't know or didn't care." I stood up slowly. My legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone older than me. "They wanted me to know the box was gone," I said. "It wasn't a question. That's what it looks like." I walked back to the cabinet, ran my hand along the back of the inner drawer cavity past the false back into the narrow space behind it, where Eleanor and I had put things we needed to keep but couldn't bear to look at daily. My fingers found paper, cool and smooth, a sealed envelope still there, because the wooden box was never the real box. It was the one that looked like the real box, the one that sat where anyone watching would expect to find something important. Eleanor had thought of everything, including the possibility that someone might come looking. I held the sealed envelope and stood alone in my quiet house and felt under the grief and the anger and the exhaustion. Something small and clear and cold. They had come for the wrong thing. I had everything I needed exactly where she had left it. My phone buzzed. A message from Celeste to Nathan forwarded to me from a number I didn't immediately recognize in a way I wouldn't understand for another 3 days. "It's done. He doesn't have it anymore." I set the phone face down on the nightstand. "No," I said to the empty room. You don't. I wasn't there. But some things leave marks on the people who were, and marks have a way of talking. The Belhaven was a boutique hotel 4 blocks from the river, the kind of place with thick carpets that swallowed footsteps and room service that arrived without knocking. Scott Avery had been staying there since Monday, billing it to the production budget that Celeste had approved without blinking. Marcus Hendricks, a features writer for the Savannah Metro Digest, was waiting in the corridor outside room 214 when the door opened at 9:28. He was 41, worked on a freelance retainer, and had a mortgage that made him flexible about certain editorial standards. What he saw, he would later describe to a colleague as not nothing. Celeste stepped out of Scott's room wearing yesterday's coat over a dress that had been pressed at some point the previous evening but hadn't quite recovered. Her hair was pulled back quickly, not the precise, intentional pullback she usually wore, but the kind that happens when you're working with a travel mirror and 15 minutes. She saw Dale immediately. She didn't flinch, which told Dale she had already decided in the 2 seconds before she spotted him exactly what her face was going to do. Marcus! Her voice was warm and crisp, like a handshake. Early morning. I could say the same, Dale said, and left it there. Scott appeared in the doorway, shirt half tucked, holding a coffee cup that was clearly from the in-room machine and not from the lobby. Hendricks, he said. You got my message about the media packet. I did, Dale said. His eyes moved between the two of them once, just once. That's actually what I'm here about. Celeste stepped smoothly into the center of the hallway, putting herself between Dale and Scott, the way a person positions themselves when they want to redirect a conversation without appearing to do so. Walk with me, she said to Dale, and it wasn't a question. They moved down the corridor toward the elevator. Celeste kept her voice low and even, the kind of voice that rooms don't carry. The teaser runs tomorrow at noon, she said. That gives the story 24 hours to breathe before the gala. By the time Nathan takes the stage, the narrative is already in the room. Marcus pulled out a small notebook, old habit. And the angle. Leadership transition, Celeste said. A founder who built something great, and a company that's outgrown the founding generation. She paused. It's not an attack. It's a eulogy. She said the word without irony, which was the most frightening thing about it. Eulogies make people feel good about moving on. Marcus wrote something. Any comment from Thomas? Celeste smiled, and in the half-second before the elevator arrived, Marcus caught at the smallest tremor in her right hand as she reached for the button. Not enough to call it a shake, just enough to call it human. Thomas will speak for himself, she said. That's rather the point. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. Marcus stood in the corridor, alone, notebook in hand, and wrote one more word under his notes. Careful. I am not someone who falls apart in bathrooms. I want to be clear about that because what happened at 12:05 on a Tuesday afternoon in the third-floor men's room of my own company is not a story I tell easily. But I've committed to honesty, and honesty doesn't get to pick its settings. I had been in a budget review meeting all morning, the kind of meeting that requires you to look attentive while your mind is doing something else entirely. Kevin Mercer had sent me 3 encrypted emails before 10 o'clock, each one a layer deeper into the access log trail. Diana Moss had forwarded me Hartwell Partners' follow-up questions, which were pointed and uncomfortable. And at 11:53, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Not a text, a voice memo, 7 seconds long. I didn't listen to it until I was standing at the sink with the water running. The voice was filtered, processed through something to strip the identifying qualities out of it, the way you'd flatten a signal in a recording studio. But the words were clean enough. She's been selling your image to the press since November. She has a contact at Metro Digest. The producer is in on it. They have a signal amber cut. It means zoom in when Thomas looks weak. 7 seconds. Then silence. I stood at the sink with the water running cold over my wrists and felt my stomach turn over once hard like something being wrung out. I knew about amber cut. I had heard Celeste say it once at a company event 6 months ago and filed it away as industry jargon. I hadn't known what it meant until this moment. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. 63 years old. Gray at the temples, a jaw that had grown more angular with age, eyes that Eleanor used to say looked like someone had left a light on inside. I didn't see any light right now. I saw a man whose daughter-in-law had been photographing his worst moments and packaging them for distribution. My throat tightened. I pressed both hands flat on the cold edge of the sink. "Don't," I said to my reflection, out loud, quietly, firmly. "Don't you dare fall apart in here. That is exactly what they are counting on." I took a breath, then another. The kind of breathing you learn when you've had enough hard years, not calm exactly, but functional. The kind that gets you back into the room. I turned off the water, dried my hands, pulled out my phone and typed one message to Kevin Mercer. From this point forward, all system access logs are to be backed up to Maggie Cole's secure server every 6 hours. No exceptions. No one else gets visibility. Then I straightened my jacket, checked my face in the mirror one more time, not for vanity, but for armor, and walked back out into the hallway like a man who had simply stopped to wash his hands. But I was shaking on the inside the whole way back to the conference room, and I thought November. She started in November, while Eleanor's name was still on the holiday charity banners in the lobby. That was the part that made me close my eyes for just a second at the conference room door. Not the betrayal, the timing. I reconstruct this evening from what came out later from the recording Nathan made, which I would not hear until much closer to the end. Georgia is a one-party consent state. Nathan was a participant in every conversation he recorded. The recordings were legal. That did not make them feel less cold. But I've listened to it enough times now that I can close my eyes and hear every pause, every syllable, every self-satisfied exhale of a man who believed he was the smartest person in any room he entered. Gerald had poured himself a second whiskey before Nathan arrived. The printer in the corner was running. As always, Gerald seemed to need the sound of productivity around him, the way other men needed music. Nathan came in and sat down without being asked, which was its own kind of message. "You reviewed the Phase 2 timeline?" Gerald asked, settling into his leather chair with the ease of a man on familiar ground. "I did," Nathan said. "And clean." Nathan rested one ankle on the opposite knee, relaxed, unthreatening. "You've structured it well. The Delaware entities create enough distance that any inquiry would take months to trace back." Gerald nodded slowly, pleased in the way people are pleased when they feel seen. "The beauty of a 3-layer structure," he said, "is that by the time anyone gets to Layer 2, they've already exhausted their resources on Layer 1. Regulatory fatigue." "Right," Nathan said. He shifted his phone slightly on the armrest. "Just a degree. Just enough." "The Gala is the trigger point," Gerald continued. "Once Nathan Whitfield is publicly positioned as the undisputed face of the company, your father sidelined, the board neutralized the Phase 2 activation, becomes almost academic. The credentials are yours. The access is yours. And there's no version of this," Nathan said carefully, his voice carrying just the right amount of casual curiosity, "where any of the liability folds back toward me." Gerald laughed. Not a kind laugh, the laugh of a man who enjoys demonstrating his own architecture. "Not a chance. Your name is on the governance layer only. Everything underneath is structured through entities that have no legal connection to you." He leaned forward. You are for all purposes clean. Nathan looked at him steadily. Good, he said. That's what I needed to hear. What Nathan didn't say, what he was careful not to say, was that the word needed was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. He didn't need reassurance. He needed Gerald to say those words into a microphone while believing he was in a private conversation with his son-in-law. Gerald picked up his whiskey glass and raised it slightly. 3 more days, he said. Nathan raised his own glass. 2 men who thought they were each using the other. One of them was right. The meeting should have been over. But Gerald, flushed with whiskey and the warm certainty of a man who believes the future is already written, pulled one more document from the leather folder on his desk. One more thing, he said. Routine. Just a structural addendum to the vendor authorization protocol. It cleans up some language in the original agreement, makes the Phase 2 activation more elegant from a paperwork standpoint. He slid it across the desk. 4 pages dense with legal language, the signature line already tabbed with a small, yellow, sticky arrow. Nathan picked it up. He skimmed the first page. He turned to the second. In that moment, and I know this because I have listened to the recording, heard the exact texture of the silence. Something shifted in the room. Nathan's breathing changed just slightly, almost imperceptible. Because Nathan, whatever else he was not stupid. And somewhere in the dense language of page 2, he had found what this addendum actually did. It transferred sole activation authority for Phase 2 to a single set of executive credentials. His credentials. Irrevocably. With no co-signatory requirement. It was not a structural cleanup. It was a lock. It was Gerald ensuring that if everything went sideways, the signature trail ended with one name, and that name was not Gerald Harmon. Just routine, Nathan said. His voice was perfectly level. Absolutely, Gerald said. He smiled with all the warmth of a man who has just closed a trap and is waiting to see if the animal will notice. Nathan looked at the signature line. He looked at Gerald. And then he signed it. He signed it slowly, which was not how Nathan usually signed anything. He signed it like a man making a decision, not like a man completing a formality. Gerald reached across and took the document back, tucking it into the leather folder with a satisfied little pat. Excellent, he said. Nathan capped his pen. He set it on the arm of the chair with a small, precise click. And he thought, you just signed your own name to this, Gerald. You just sat across from me and told me exactly what this is. You handed me a lock and thought you were handing me a key, because Nathan had his own version of what routine meant. He had just ensured that the addendum and Gerald's explanation of it was now part of a recording that a trust attorney in downtown Savannah would receive before midnight. Gerald raised his glass one more time, cheerful and oblivious. Nathan smiled back at him. It was the most expensive smile in the room. Amber Ross arrived at her desk at 8:45, which was 15 minutes before anyone expected her, and 45 minutes before the thing that was waiting for her in her inbox. She had not slept well. She had spent part of the night going back through the vendor documentation she'd printed and folded into her blazer pocket, annotating it with a red pen in the margins, adding dates and cross-references the way she had been trained to do. She had a neat, precise mind, and neat, precise minds do not rest comfortably when they know something is wrong. She opened her email at 9:10. The subject line of the first message read, Urgent Policy Violation Report, submitted by A. Ross. She stared at it. She had not submitted a policy violation report. Not this morning. Not yesterday. Not ever using that specific form on that specific subject. She opened the email. It was formatted exactly like an official internal compliance report. The company template, the correct header, her employee ID number, her digital signature. The body of the report accused a member of the finance team of falsifying expense records. The accusation was not true. The person named had been with the company for 7 years, and to Amber's knowledge had never had so much as a late timesheet. But more importantly, the email had come from her address, her actual work address. Sent at 11:52 p.m. the previous night, when Amber had been at home in bed with her work laptop closed on the kitchen counter. Her hands went cold. Emails spoofing the term came to her automatically, the way technical language comes to people who've studied it. It's a method where someone disguises an outgoing message to appear as though it originated from a trusted address. Done correctly, it bypasses basic spam filters and appears entirely authentic to the recipient. Done for this purpose, it was a setup. Someone had used her name to file a false report, and now that report was sitting in the inboxes of HR Legal and her direct supervisor. Dale Whitmore appeared at the entrance to her cubicle at 9:22. His expression carrying the particular awkwardness of a man delivering news he doesn't fully understand. "Amber," he said, "HR wants to see you at 10. There's been a—" He paused. "A concern raised." "About the report," she said flatly. He blinked. "You know about it. I know it wasn't me." Her voice was steady, but her right hand resting on the edge of the desk had curled into a loose fist. "Someone sent that email from my address. I need to speak to IT security before I go anywhere near HR." Whitmore looked deeply uncomfortable, which was his default setting, but seemed more pronounced than usual. "Amber, it would really be better if you just—" "Dale." She met his eyes. "If I walk into that HR meeting without documentation proving that email was spoofed from my account, I will be suspended by noon for something I didn't do. Is that what you want?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "I need 20 minutes, she said. "And I need Kevin Mercer." She picked up her phone before he could answer and dialed. Frank Aldridge stood at the far end of the compliance floor, watching from beside the copy machine. He had been there for 11 minutes. He had not made any copies. When Amber's eyes swept the room and landed on him for just a second, he looked away first. He looked away like a man who already knows what he's done. The room they'd chosen was the smallest one on the floor, no windows, drop ceiling, the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they hadn't slept, which in our case was accurate. Amber Ross was already there when I pushed open the door, both hands wrapped tight around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. Kevin Mercer sat across from her, his laptop open between them, his expression carrying the careful neutrality of someone who has uncovered something ping and is waiting to see how badly the room is going to take it. Amber looked up when I walked in. I had seen that look before on clients, on employees, on people in waiting rooms who had been holding something too heavy for too long and were just now seeing someone reach for it. Not relief. Something rawer than relief. "Walk me through it," I said, taking the chair beside Kevin. He turned the laptop toward me. "The email submitted to HR and legal last night filed under Amber's name, her employee ID, her digital signature. Sent at 11:52 p.m. He pointed to a line of text that most people would scroll past without understanding. But when I pulled the raw header data, the originating IP address doesn't belong to any device registered to Amber. It roots back to a network node inside this building, specifically the third-floor server room. I looked at Amber. "Someone used our own system to frame you." "From inside the building," she said. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight in the way jaws get when someone is working very hard to keep something from escaping their face. Which means it wasn't random. This was specific. This was me. "You flagged the vendor anomaly 2 days ago," I said. "You sent a memo that Dale buried in 48 hours. She set down the coffee cup a little harder than she meant to by the sound of it. And now I've suddenly filed a false report against a 7-year employee at midnight, while I was home asleep. Her voice cracked on the last word, not from sadness, from fury. This is because I found something, and someone decided it was easier to destroy me than explain it. Yes, I said, that's exactly what it is. She stared at me. I don't think she'd expected me to say it that plainly. Kevin, I said, badge log for the server room. Who had access that night? Kevin slid a printed page across the table without a word. 6 names. I read them once slowly and stopped at number 3. Frank Aldridge. The name sat on the page, and I felt it land somewhere behind my sternum. 11 years. The man had brought his daughter to the company picnic every summer. He had wept, genuinely wept, at Eleanor's funeral, quiet in the back row, hat in hand. He was not a villain. He was a man who had made a desperate choice because someone had given him no other option, and that distinction mattered to me even now. It didn't make what he'd done acceptable. It just made it human, which was somehow harder to carry. Nobody moves this evidence, I said. The header data, the badge log, all of it encrypted copy to Maggie Cole's secure server before 5 o'clock. Kevin, I need you on that personally. Already drafting the transfer, Kevin said. I turned back to Amber. You're not walking into that HR meeting alone. I'm going to have Maggie on the phone before you sit down. And nobody, not Dale, not HR, nobody touches your employment record until the full forensic picture is documented and in front of them. Amber looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face moved, shifted, softened, then hardened again, like she didn't quite trust the feeling. Mr. Whitfield, she said carefully, why are you doing this? You have enough problems this week. I thought about Mrs. Dorothy Lane's papery hand on my wrist. I thought about Eleanor's voice in my kitchen at 1 a.m. I thought about every person who had ever been small enough to be used and then discarded by people with more power than conscience. Because you did your job, I said. You saw something wrong, you documented it, and you reported it through the proper channels, and somebody tried to end your career over breakfast for it. I paused. That doesn't happen in this building while I'm still standing in it. Amber pressed her lips together so hard they went white. She looked down at the table, and I gave her the 30 seconds she needed to hold herself together, because some people need the room to look away before they can breathe again. Kevin cleared his throat quietly. There's one more thing, he said. The hallway camera outside the server room flagged motion at 11:47 p.m. The figure kept their face away from the primary angle, but the secondary camera at the end of the corridor caught a partial. He turned the laptop back toward himself. I've sent it to Maggie already. Good, I said. I stood up. Amber looked up at me one more time, and this time her eyes were dry and clear and very, very angry, which meant she was going to be all right. Ray Delgado had been pulling cable and chasing feedback loops at live events since he was 25 years old. He was 41 now, built like the work broad through the shoulders, hands permanently scarred from cable burns and connector edges. The kind of quiet professional competence that made event organizers sleep soundly. He didn't create drama. He prevented it. He showed up early, stayed late, and when things went wrong, and things always went wrong, he fixed them without needing anyone to notice. He was alone in the technical booth at 11:55 running a final diagnostic on the audio routing grid when he saw it. The Heritage Center's event management system ran an automatic backup every 4 hours, a liability measure the venue had implemented after a disputed incident 3 years back involving a corporate event and a very angry attorney. The backups covered every camera feed, every audio channel, every network access log. Ray had installed the system himself, He was one of 3 people in the building who knew exactly how it worked. The backup from 4 nights ago was still sitting on the local server. 12 minutes of corridor footage time-stamped and intact from a night when someone had accessed the venue's network outside of business hours. Ray stared at the file name for a long time. He was not the kind of man who got involved in things. He had a daughter in 7th grade who needed new cleats and a science fair project due in 2 weeks. He had a truck payment on the 15th and a landlord who did not negotiate. He had, in 16 years of event work, made it his personal policy to see nothing that wasn't a speaker cable or a lighting cue. But 3 days ago, through the production intercom, the shared channel that Scott Avery's crew had patched into without asking permission, which was itself a violation of venue protocol that Ray had logged and then set aside, he had heard 2 words that hadn't left him since. Amber cut. He hadn't understood it then. He understood it less now that he understood more. His hand hovered over the keyboard. Then he picked up his personal phone and dialed. Thomas Whitfield answered before the second ring. Ray. His voice was awake, alert. No grogginess, no irritation, just presence. Mr. Whitfield. Ray kept his voice low out of habit even though he was completely alone. I've got footage on the backup server. 12 minutes corridor 4 nights ago. Someone tried to send a remote deletion command about 40 minutes back. I didn't enter the confirmation code. He paused. The footage is still there, but whoever sent that command knows it didn't go through. A silence. Then, are you still in the building? Yes, sir. Don't move the footage. Don't copy it. Don't touch it. Don't tell anyone else it exists. Can you do that? I can do that. Ray's throat tightened. But Mr. Whitfield, I need you to understand something. I heard the signal. The amber cut thing. I don't know all of what's going on here, but I know enough to know that if someone figures out I didn't delete that file, then you need to not be alone in that building right now, Thomas said, and his voice had shifted, still calm, but with a different quality underneath it, the kind of calm that comes from someone making a fast decision. I'm coming to you. Don't leave until I get there. Ray sat back in his chair and let out a long, unsteady breath. Outside the booth's glass front, the empty hall stretched away into the dark. The Gala set up only half-finished rows of navy-covered chairs, facing a stage that wasn't ready yet for what it was about to hold. I made it there in 19 minutes. Ray was outside the staff entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders up around his ears against the January cold. The parking lot was nearly empty, a security guard's truck near the loading dock, a few stragglers from a late catering delivery. The sodium lights overhead turned everything the color of old photographs. He saw my headlights and straightened up, but his body didn't relax. He had the look of a man who had been running on adrenaline for the past hour and was only now starting to feel the bill coming due. I got out and walked toward him, and he started talking before I'd fully reached him, like the words had been building pressure and needed somewhere to go. They sent the deletion command through the venue's admin network, he said. Not the production crew's system. Whoever it was has access to the building's back end. That's not Scott Avery's people. That's someone with venue credentials or someone who got them. He stopped, ran a hand over his face. Mr. Whitfield, I'm just a tech. I fix things that buzz when they shouldn't. I am not equipped for... He gestured vaguely at the night air, at whatever this was. For any of this. I know, I said. I've got a daughter. His voice dropped. She's 12. She thinks I run a soundboard for a living, which is basically true, and that is all I want my life to be. If somebody decides I'm a problem. Ray. I said his name the way you say someone's name when you need them to stop moving for a moment and actually hear you. He stopped. You didn't do anything wrong. You found footage that exists legally on a server you installed. You received a deletion command you were not obligated to execute. You made a phone call. I held his gaze. That is the entire list of things you did tonight. He looked at me. His jaw was working slightly like he was chewing on something he wasn't sure he could swallow. How do I know that's how it stays? He asked, quietly, honestly. I reached into my jacket and pulled out one of Maggie's cards. I held it out to him. Margaret Cole, I said. She's been my attorney for 15 years. If anyone contacts you about this footage, about this week, about anything connected to this Gala you call her, before you say a single word, she will handle it. Your name in this story is witness, not suspect, not target. Witness. Ray took the card. He turned it over in his fingers like he was checking it was real. And the footage, he said. Kevin Mercer from our IT team will be at the venue at 8 tomorrow morning with proper chain of custody documentation. We preserve it the right way, legal documented clean. You hand it over, you sign the witness form, and you go back to running your soundboard. Something in Ray's face finally shifted, a long, slow release of breath, like pressure bleeding off a valve. Okay, he said quietly. Then after a beat, thank you. We stood there in the cold for a moment longer. Two men who had not asked to be standing in a parking lot at midnight. And I thought about how many decent people were going to get dragged into the wake of what Nathan and Gerald and Celeste had set in motion. People who just wanted to do their jobs, pay their bills, be home before their kids went to sleep. I thought, not this one. I can protect this one. The kitchen was dark when I got home except for the small light above the stove that I always left on Eleanor's habit, absorbed into mine so completely that I no longer remembered which of us had started it. I sat down at the table. I didn't turn on the overhead light. The stove light was enough. The wooden box was where I'd left it, the real one. The one from the false back of the cabinet drawer, not the decoy they'd taken. I set it on the table in front of me and just looked at it for a moment. It was plain oak, nothing decorative, corners worn soft from years of being moved and handled. Eleanor had bought it at an estate sale in 1997 for $4 and used it to hold her important papers until important papers became a thing you kept in cloud storage and with your attorney. Inside was her letter, and beneath the letter the sealed envelope with the silver wax. I unfolded the letter. I'd read it perhaps 30 times since she died. Certain passages I knew the way you know a song you grew up with, not memorized exactly, but absorbed, carried somewhere below conscious thought. I read the part I always came back to last. Don't let your love for him become the reason he doesn't have to face what he's done. The hardest thing a parent can do is let a consequence land. But Tom and I mean this with everything I have. Leave the door open. Whatever door you can. He is still ours. I folded the letter and pressed it flat against the table with both hands. My chest hurt in the particular way it hurts, when grief and anger and love occupy the same space at the same time, and there isn't enough room for all three of them. I'm leaving the door open, I said to the empty kitchen. But I can't hold it open forever. The stove light hummed faintly. Outside, the January wind moved through the oak tree in the backyard. I put the letter back in the box, laid the sealed envelope beside it, and closed the lid. Maggie appeared on my laptop screen at 9 o'clock, exactly silver-haired, sharp-eyed, holding a coffee cup that actually appeared to be empty. Behind her, the tall shelves of her downtown office were stacked with binders the color of old decisions. I've reviewed everything Kevin sent, she said without greeting, because Maggie treated greetings as an inefficiency she had long since eliminated. The spoofed email is solid forensically. Clean IP trail, clear timestamp discrepancy. Any competent expert witness can lay it out for a courtroom in under 8 minutes. She set down the empty cup. The badge log is going to be harder for certain parties to explain. And the recording from Gerald's study. She paused, pressing her lips together briefly, as though choosing her words the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. Gerald Harmon is going to need his own counsel. I'd recommend he find someone quickly. And Nathan, I said. Nathan signed the addendum. Maggie looked at me steadily. I understand his reasoning. Strategically, it anchors Gerald to the activation trail. But it also means Nathan's credentials are directly irrevocably attached to the Phase 2 transaction. In any proceeding, his defense will be coercion, that he was manipulated into signing under false pretenses by his father-in-law. Is that viable? It depends entirely on what Nathan does in the next 48 hours. She paused. Thomas, if he publicly distances himself from you at the gala formally on record in front of witnesses, the trust's independent trigger conditions are satisfied. The activation clause kicks in. And the redemption provision. Maggie was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something softer than her usual register, not sentiment exactly, but care. Eleanor put it there for a reason, but the provision requires voluntary disclosure. Nathan has to choose it. You presenting the clause doesn't constitute his choice. Only he can make it. I looked out the window at the bare oak tree in the backyard. Pale January light, thin and honest. And if he doesn't choose it, then the clause still activates, Maggie said gently. And the redemption provision stays in the document unused. The silence between us was the kind that doesn't need filling. I'll have the full packet ready, Maggie said finally. The seal holds until Saturday night. After that, it's your call. Thank you, Maggie. She nodded once, the precise, settled nod she used when something was decided, and ended the call. The screen went dark. Outside, the wind moved through the oak tree one more time. I had 2 days left. I picked up my pen and started writing down everything that still needed to happen before Saturday night, my handwriting steadier than my hands. Crisis meetings have their own smell. Coffee gone cold, dry erase marker, and something underneath both of those, the particular sharpness of people who haven't been sleeping well, trying to hold themselves together in the same room. Diana Moss was standing at the projector when I walked in, and the chart behind her told the story before she said a word. The revenue line had a new shape this morning. Nobody in the room was pretending otherwise. Close the door, she said. I closed it. Sat down. Kevin Mercer was at the far end of the table with his laptop open, and 3 phones lined up beside it, like instruments on a surgical tray. 2 junior analysts flanked him, both holding very still, in the way young employees do when they've sensed that the wrong breath might draw attention. Diana didn't ease into it. That was one of the things I had always respected about her. She believed that softening bad news was a form of disrespect. Hartwell Partners invoked the MAC clause this morning, she said. Material adverse change. They're pausing their commitment until they receive written assurance about the leadership structure. She clicked to the next slide. In plain terms, they've read the article, they've heard the noise, and they want to know if the person they agreed to partner with is still running this company. How much exposure? I asked. Directly $40 million in deferred deployment. But that's not the real number. She set down her clicker. Hartwell functions as a bellwether. If they move, the others watch. If the others watch long enough, they follow. She paused. We could be looking at a cascade. The room held its breath. There's more, Kevin said. He turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was an email from Morrison Black and Associates, our external audit firm out of Atlanta, requesting expedited document access ahead of the quarterly close. They received an anonymous tip through their ethics hotline 2 nights ago. The tip didn't come from us, I said. No. Kevin's voice was even. Submission IP routes to a coffee shop near the Bellhaven Hotel. Not our network. Not anyone on our team. Diana's head turned sharply toward Kevin. Someone outside our circle knows the interior language of Phase 2. The tip used the phrase, credential-based activation, Kevin said. That's not public terminology. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that settles over a room when everyone arrives at the same uncomfortable conclusion at the same time. I stood up. My knees registered the past week in a way they hadn't when I was 50, but I kept that off my face. Diana response package to Hartwell by 3 o'clock. Clean, direct, no defensiveness. Governance structure, board oversight. Leadership, continuity. Just the facts laid out calmly. I looked at Kevin. Full credential access log to Maggie before close of business. Then I looked around the table at Diana, at Kevin, at the two analysts who were going to go home tonight, with a great deal to think about. Everything said in this room stays in this room, not to hide anything, because we have 48 hours, and the wrong word to the wrong person could collapse what we're trying to protect. I paused. I'm asking you to trust the process. Diana looked at me for a long moment, the way she looked at balance sheets carefully, completely. Yes, she said. We can do that. I kept Kevin after the others left. The Bellhaven, I said. That's where Scott Avery has been staying. 90 seconds from the coffee shop's side entrance. Kevin pulled up a map on his laptop, pointed. The ethics submission was time-stamped at 11:14 p.m. 2 nights ago. Scott's production crew wrapped at the venue around 10:45. I sat on the edge of my desk. Outside the window, Savannah in January looked exactly like it always did, beautiful, patient, indifferent to whatever was happening inside the buildings. Moss on the live oaks. Light like watered-down gold. So either someone from Scott's team broke ranks, I said, or there's a player in this picture we haven't accounted for. The writing style suggests someone organized, Kevin said. Precise terminology, no emotional language structured like a compliance brief. This wasn't written in anger. He turned the laptop toward me. Read it. I read it. 3 paragraphs. Clean and cold the way a scalpel is clean and cold. They didn't want to wait for Saturday, I said. It looks that way. Kevin closed the laptop. Do you want me to try to identify them? I thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, turning it over the way you turn a stone to see what's living underneath. Not yet, I said. Whoever this is, they've just handed the auditors a thread worth pulling. I'm not going to interrupt that by looking too hard at the hand holding it. I stood up. But watch for movement. If they act again before Saturday, I need to know first. Kevin nodded and gathered his things. He was at the door when he stopped, one hand on the frame, and turned back. Mr. Whitfield. He paused like he was deciding something. 6 years I've been here. I've watched how this place runs. Another pause. Saturday night, whatever happens, the people in this building know who built it. He left before I could answer, which told me he hadn't said it for a response. He'd said it because it was true. I stood alone in my office and let the quiet of that settle somewhere it could do some good. Nathan told me about this conversation 11 days after the gala, sitting across from me at Maggie's conference table. He was specific about the words. He had been going over them long enough that they had worn grooves. I have written it as close to his account as I can, knowing I was not in that room, and that memory is its own kind of editor. The dressing room was narrow, an overlit bulb-ringed mirror, the smell of hairspray and stage dust, the low hum of the building settling after the rehearsal. Nathan was at the mirror loosening his tie when Celeste came in and closed the door with the careful quiet of someone who doesn't want the sound to carry. She crossed to him and straightened his collar, a gesture that looked like tenderness from the outside. From the inside, Nathan said it felt like a hand checking the fit of a leash. The audit request went to Morrison Black, she said. Nathan's hands stilled. I know. That wasn't us. Her voice was measured, but Nathan could hear the heat underneath it, the way you hear a fire through a closed door. Someone tipped them. Someone who knows the language of Phase 2 from the inside. I know that too. Then you understand what it means. She met his eyes in the mirror. If you don't draw a clean public line at the gala, if you don't make it absolutely clear that the company's future isn't entangled with… She stopped, started again. You need to cut him loose, Nathan. Saturday night. On camera. No room for interpretation. Nathan turned around to face her directly. Celeste, to her credit, didn't step back. And then what? He said. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't calm. Then we control what happens next. You keep saying we. He looked at her, really looked the way he hadn't in a long time. The addendum has my signature. The credentials are mine. If Phase 2 gets traced back, it won't, she said. Fast. Too fast. Celeste. He said her name like a question she hadn't answered yet. If this goes wrong, who exactly is holding the bag? She turned back to the mirror and uncapped her lipstick. It won't go wrong, she said to her own reflection. Nathan stood behind her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then his hands, loose at his sides, closed into fists and opened again. Once. Twice. The motion of a man checking whether he still had control of something he was no longer sure belonged to him. Kevin's office smelled like cold electronics and Portland coffee, which was exactly how it always smelled, which was somehow steadying. Diana and I sat across from his primary workstation, while he walked us through the timeline he'd spent 18 hours building. On the screen, a horizontal line stretched from left to right, marked in color blue for the vendor layer, orange for the money movement, red for what waited at the end. 3 layers, Kevin said, and his voice had the calm of someone who had organized something terrible into something comprehensible. Layer 1 is the vendor network. 3 shell entities, Delaware Incorporation, same P.O. box in Chatham County, invoices structured below the $50,000 automatic approval threshold. He glanced at Diana. Smurfing, she said for my benefit. Standard structuring technique, breaking large transactions into smaller amounts to avoid triggering regulatory review. It's a federal offense under the Bank Secrecy Act. Layer 2 is where the actual transfer happens, Kevin continued. Vendor payments accumulate in a holding structure and redistribute through a secondary entity using fabricated service invoices, documentation for work that was never performed. And Layer 3, I said, though my eyes were already on the red marker at the end of the line. Phase 2 activation. A single command, one input, one execution that releases the full accumulated amount. Kevin moved the cursor to the red marker. It requires executive credentials and biometric confirmation. A password isn't enough. The system requires a physical biometric input at the time of execution. It cannot be delegated, cannot be spoofed, cannot be entered retroactively. Diana leaned forward. Whose credentials? Nathan Whitfield's, Kevin said. Only his. The room went the kind of quiet that has texture to it. I looked at the red marker. $186 million sitting at the end of a line with one name attached to it and no exit ramp. Can we prove it conclusively? I asked. The credential log is time-stamped and encrypted on our server, Kevin said. The biometric requirement creates an unambiguous record of who initiated the command and when. There is no technical argument that supports any other interpretation. He held my gaze. If Phase 2 activates the data, says one thing and one thing only. I stood up. My body was tired in the deep way, the kind that sleep doesn't fully fix, the kind that only ends when the thing causing it ends. Full forensic report to Maggie tonight, I said, "and brief Harold Sinclair first thing tomorrow. He needs to understand what the board may be asked to act on before Saturday." Diana was already on her feet, already moving. Kevin had turned back to his keyboard before I finished the sentence. At the door, I stopped. "Kevin." He looked up. "Thank you. Genuinely." He held my gaze for exactly 1 second. "Go home, Mr. Whitfield," he said. "Get some rest." I called Frank Aldridge that evening before I left the building. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. I said only, "I know what she had on you, Frank. I also know you gave her what she asked for. Those two things are both true at the same time, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." A long silence. "Come in tomorrow morning. Bring your attorney. We handle this properly, not quietly, not with punishment for its own sake, but properly. You understand the difference?" He said yes. I believed him. I didn't tell him that rest wasn't something I was going to find tonight. Some things you keep to yourself. I had not opened the bottom drawer of my desk in 14 months. Not because I had forgotten what was in it. Precisely because I hadn't. The folder was manila unremarkable, the kind you buy in bulk and label by hand. Nathan's handwriting was on the tab, a habit from his early 20s, when he used to help me organize files on Saturday mornings, back when we were still the kind of father and son who spent Saturday mornings together. His handwriting then had been loose and fast, the writing of a young man who thought faster than his hand could follow. I set the folder on the desk and opened it. The documents inside were 11 years old, a board resolution, a letter from our then general counsel, a settlement agreement stamped confidential in red ink that had faded to a pale rust. 11 years ago, Nathan had been 27, newly promoted to a VP role. He wasn't ready for running a vendor contract negotiation that had gone sideways in a way that was partly his inexperience and partly something else, a corner cut, a number adjusted, a decision made at 10 p.m. on a Friday when he thought no one was checking. Someone had been checking. The board had wanted to terminate him. I had argued against it for 3 hours in a meeting that left me hoarse. I had called in every favor I had, with every board member I knew. I had told them that my son had made a mistake, not a choice, that there was a difference, and that the difference mattered. They had let him stay. I sat at my desk and looked at the settlement agreement and felt the specific hollow weight of a decision you made in love that came back to find you years later. Had I saved him? Or had I simply delayed the reckoning and handed it to more people to absorb? I didn't know. That was the honest answer, and I had spent enough of this week being dishonest with myself about things that deserved honesty. I pressed 2 fingers hard against my eyes. My chest hurt. Not medically, the other kind. The kind that lives between the ribs and has no treatment except time. "I pulled you back from the edge once," I said to the empty study, to the boy who no longer existed in the man I'd watched on that stage rehearsal. I would have done it 100 times, but I can't keep pulling Nathan. At some point, the rope runs out. I closed the folder. I didn't put it back in the drawer. I set it on the desk where I could see it, a reminder, not a punishment. A record of how long I had been trying. I made tea I didn't drink, and sat down at the kitchen table with Eleanor's letter. I had read it enough times that I knew which words my eyes would go to. First, the slant of certain letters, the way she crossed her T's with a small extra loop that was purely hers, a quirk she'd carried since the 3rd grade, according to her mother. Even after 3 years, I could hear her voice in the sentences. Not a ghost voice, just hers. The one I had listened to for 31 years. The one I still caught myself turning toward in empty rooms. "You're going to want to fix it, Tom. That's who you are. But some things don't get fixed, they get chosen. He has to choose. You just have to make sure the door exists." I set the letter flat on the table and put my hand over it, the way you put your hand on something you're afraid might drift away. Then I cried. Not dramatically, I want to be clear about that. Not the kind of crying that announces itself. The quiet kind. The kind that comes when you've been holding something at a certain angle for too long, and your arms finally give out. My shoulders dropped. My throat closed up. My eyes burned and then spilled, and I let them because there was no camera here, no producer with a signal, no one who needed me to be steady. After a while, I wiped my face with the dish towel, hanging from the oven handle. Eleanor's practical voice in my head used what's nearest, and I read the last paragraph of the letter again. The clause isn't punishment. It's architecture. I built the door. You decide when to open it. But Tom, whatever he chooses, you come back to this kitchen, and you make yourself a cup of something, and you remember that you did everything a father could do. Because you will have. I know you. I folded the letter. I placed it back in the wooden box. Then I sat in the quiet of the kitchen for a long time listening to the January wind move through the oak tree outside. And I thought about all the things love can't fix, and all the things it still has to try. Maggie called at 2 o'clock, which I had asked her to do. "Everything's ready," she said. Her voice had the particular quality it carried when she was being careful, not cold, but precise the way a surgeon's hands are precise. "The activation clause packet is sealed and in my briefcase. I'll have it at the venue by 7:30. "And the other document," I said. A pause. "Also ready, also sealed." Another pause, smaller. "Thomas, are you sure you want to bring it?" I looked at the envelope on the table in front of me. It was thicker than the activation clause packet, more pages, more weight. Inside was a conditional transfer document, a prepared framework for transitioning executive authority to Nathan under a specific set of circumstances. Not a gift, a possibility. The kind of document that only meant something if the person it was written for did the one thing required to activate it. "I'm sure," I said. "I'm not going to use it unless there's a reason to, but I want it there." "He may not give you a reason," Maggie said quietly. "I know. And if he doesn't, then I bring it home and it goes in the drawer with Eleanor's box." I picked up the pen beside the envelope and turned it between my fingers. Maggie, she built this clause because she believed people could change. Not that they always do, that they can. I set the pen down. I'm not ready to stop believing that. Not until Saturday night proves me wrong. The silence on the line was the kind Maggie allowed when she thought something deserved to sit without a response. Then she said gently but clearly, "The redemption provision requires him to choose it voluntarily. You know that." "I know. You can't want it for him hard enough to make it happen." "I know that too." My voice came out rougher than I intended, and I cleared my throat. "That's the part that makes it hard, Maggie. I know all the right things. I just can't make myself feel them cleanly yet." Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Eleanor knew that about you," she said. "That's why she wrote the letter." I didn't have an answer for that, so I said 7:30, don't be late. "I'm never late," she said, and hung up. I signed the conditional transfer document. My hand was steady. My chest was not. I sealed it, slid it into a fresh envelope, and set it beside the silver-sealed activation packet. 2 envelopes side by side on the kitchen table, each one a different version of Saturday night. One that ended in consequence, one that ended in the smallest possible measure of hope. I sat with them for a moment. Then I got up and went to get dressed. The city looked the way Savannah looks on winter evenings, the Spanish moss gone dark, against a sky the color of a bruise healing the streetlights coming on in the squares. One by one, the old buildings holding their light like they were used to keeping secrets. I drove down Abercorn Street and past the little house where Eleanor and I had lived the first 7 years of our marriage, before the company grew enough to move us somewhere larger. The porch light was on. Someone else's life in the windows now. I didn't slow down. I had made a decision somewhere between the kitchen table and the car in that corridor of intention, where decisions actually happen, rather than the moment you announce them. I was going to this gala with 2 envelopes and one clear purpose: to give my son one honest chance to be the person I had spent 38 years believing he was capable of being. Not to humiliate him, not to destroy him, not to win, to give him a door. Whether he walked through it, that part had never been mine to control. Eleanor had understood that before I did, which was true of most things. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it at a red light. A text from Nathan. "I'll be there by 6. We should talk before it starts." I read it twice. The light changed. 4 words we should talk that could mean almost anything. They could mean he was going to warn me. They could mean he had already decided what he was going to do on that stage and wanted to prepare me for it. They could mean something had shifted in him since the dressing room, since the addendum, since the moment I imagined him standing with his hands opening and closing at his sides. Or they could mean nothing at all. I typed back, "I'll be there." 3 words. Exactly as many as I needed. The Heritage Center came into view 2 blocks ahead, lit up against the January dark, navy banners flanking the entrance, the amber glow of the lobby visible through the tall glass doors. Cars were already arriving. People in good clothes moving toward light and warmth, and the particular kind of hope that gala events generate, the kind that doesn't know yet what the evening is going to ask of it. I pulled into the parking structure and sat in the car for exactly 1 minute. I thought about Eleanor, about the oak tree, about a folder in a bottom drawer, and a boy who used to help me file papers on Saturday mornings. Then I picked up the 2 envelopes from the passenger seat, put them in my inside jacket pocket, one against each side of my chest like ballast, and got out of the car. The cold hit me the way January cold always hits when you step out of a warm car. Clean and absolute. No negotiation. I walked toward the light. January 24th, 2026. 8:12 p.m. Savannah Heritage Arts Center Main Hall. I found Nathan in the side corridor at 6:15 before the doors opened, before the caterers had finished arranging the last of the centerpieces. He was standing near a fire exit, with his jacket already on and his hands in his pockets, which was how Nathan stood when he was working something out. He looked up when he heard me coming. "You wanted to talk," I said. He opened his mouth. And then, for the first time in longer than I could remember, Nathan Whitfield looked genuinely uncertain. Not calculated uncertainty, the real kind, the kind that comes from not knowing which version of yourself is going to speak when your mouth opens. He stopped, started again. "I just wanted you to know that tonight is going to be." The door at the end of the corridor opened. Celeste, precise and purposeful in black, her eyes moving to Nathan immediately, with a look that carried more instruction than warmth. "They're opening the doors," she said. "Both of you need to be in position." Nathan looked at me once more. The uncertain thing in his face was still there, but it was losing ground to something harder, something that had been trained into him over years of watching what certainty looked like and learning to perform it. "Later," he said to me. The word landed like a door closing softly. He walked toward Celeste. She fell into step beside him without touching him, which was somehow more intimate than if she had. I watched them go. Then I reached into my jacket and felt both envelopes still there, solid against my ribs, and walked toward the main hall. The room had transformed. Navy draping hung from the rafters in long, clean panels, catching the amber light from the chandeliers and turning the whole space into something that felt like the inside of a held breath. The tables were dressed in silver, the centerpieces white lilies. Eleanor's flower, which I had specified to the event coordinator 3 weeks ago without explaining why, and she hadn't asked. I found my seat in the front row. Harold Sinclair was 2 chairs down, silver-haired and straight-backed, the posture of a man who had presided over federal proceedings for 20 years and carried the habit of stillness long after the courtrooms were behind him. He caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, the nod of a man who has been briefed and has reached a conclusion. I nodded back. The MC took the stage at 8:12, a polished woman in navy who had the voice of someone used to filling large rooms. She welcomed the crowd, thanked the sponsors, and then said the thing that hit me like a physical weight. Tonight's lead gift, a commitment of $60 million to expand senior safety technology access across the state of Georgia, comes from the Eleanor Whitfield Memorial Fund, established in honor of a woman who believed that no one should grow old afraid. The room applauded. The sound was warm and genuine, the kind that comes from people who mean it. I gripped the arm of my chair. Her name, on a banner. In a room full of people who had never met her, but were in this moment holding something she had believed in. My eyes burned. I didn't look down. I let the room be as bright as it was. From the corner of my vision, I saw Nathan on the far side of the stage, watching the LED screen where Eleanor's name was displayed. His jaw was set, but his throat moved. Once. Even after everything, even now, some things still land. I couldn't see the wings from my seat, but I could feel the machinery operating the way you feel. Weather changing, a shift in air pressure, a slight alteration in the quality of light around the stage. What I know about those 4 minutes came from Ray Delgado, who had a direct sight line from the technical booth to the production monitor in the wings, and from what Kevin's team later pulled from the venue's audio log. Celeste was positioned behind the production monitor, Scott Avery beside her. Both of them watching the camera feed with the focused attention of people watching a game they have placed a large bet on. The feed showed my face in the front row. The camera operator had already found the angle slightly below eye level, the way Scott had specified, the way that makes a subject look smaller without appearing to be a deliberate choice. Scott said quietly, "She's going to play well." The fund announcement. The crowd loves him right now. Celeste's jaw tightened. That's fine. Let them love him now. She watched the monitor. The love makes the fall further. Scott glanced at her. You sure the timing still works? The mood in that room. The mood doesn't matter, she said. The camera captures what we tell it to capture. She raised 2 fingers and held them ready. When Nathan says the line, I give the signal. You make sure the close-up is already live. Scott nodded. He pressed his earpiece. Camera 2, stand by for a tight close. Front row center. On my count. On the monitor, Celeste watched my face in the front row and saw something she had not accounted for. I wasn't performing composure. I was sitting with my eyes slightly bright and my jaw set and my hand on the arm of the chair in the particular way of a man who is feeling something real and choosing not to hide it entirely. Not weakness. Not the image she had designed. Her right hand, still raised with 2 fingers extended, developed a tremor. Not dramatic, small, the kind that betrays the gap between what a person is projecting and what their body actually knows. She lowered her hand for a moment and raised it again. Scott looked at her. You okay? I'm fine, she said, in the flat voice of someone who is not fine and knows that saying so is not an option. On the monitor, the crowd was still applauding for Eleanor's name. Celeste watched the warmth in that room and felt for the first time all week the specific cold of a plan meeting reality and finding that reality has not read the same script. Nathan came out to applause that was genuine and full, the kind a room gives someone it expects to be proud of. He walked to the podium the way he always walked, measured, deliberate, owning the space between himself and where he was going. He adjusted the microphone with one hand, the small professional gesture of a man who has done this many times. I watched him from the front row and saw for just a moment the boy who used to practice speeches in our living room using the back of the couch as a podium, insisting I sit in the armchair and give him real feedback. Be honest, Dad. Don't just tell me it was good. I had always been honest. I wondered tonight whether that had been enough. Nathan spoke about mission, about the company's growth, about what it meant to build something that reached into people's lives in the quiet moments, the vulnerable moments, the moments that happened alone in houses where no one else was watching. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. That was the particular cruelty of it, that the thing making him dangerous was also the thing that was genuinely his. The room was with him. I could feel it, the quality of attention in a crowd that has decided to trust a speaker. Heads slightly forward. Stillness. And then Nathan paused. His hands gripped the sides of the podium. His chest expanded with a breath that was slightly too large for the moment, the breath of someone gathering for something. In the wings, I knew without seeing that Celeste had raised 2 fingers. Nathan looked out at the room. His eyes moved just once to mine. I didn't look away. Whatever he saw in my face, I don't know. I wasn't performing anything. I was just there. I want everyone in this room to understand something, Nathan said. His voice was steady. Too steady, the steadiness of something held by effort rather than ease. About my father. The words landed on me the way cold water lands. My legs went soft. My hand tightened on the chair arm. I felt my throat close over a sound I was not going to make in this room, not in front of 600 people, not while a camera was pointed at my face. My eyes were wet. I didn't blink. In the front row of the Savannah Heritage Arts Center, on the night of the Winter Safety Night Gala, 63 years old, with 2 envelopes in my jacket pocket, and Eleanor's name on the banner above the stage, I waited for my son to say the next word. Before I tell you what was inside my lawyer's silver-sealed envelope, and how one word my daughter-in-law thought was secret would destroy every plan she had, I need to know. You're still here with me. If you've stayed this far, type Amber in the comments. Just one word. The same word she whispered into a producer's earpiece tonight, thinking no one else heard it. And before we continue, some parts are shaped for the lesson, not as a courtroom transcript. If your heart needs a break, step away. We'll still be here when you return. Celeste brought her fingers down. The signal went out. Camera 2 cut to my face live large on the secondary monitor in the production area, and simultaneously on the recording feed that Scott had been running all evening. A tight close-up of a 63-year-old man with wet eyes and a jaw set so hard it looked like it might crack. In the wings, Celeste exhaled. Then Nathan said the full sentence. I want everyone in this room to understand something about my father and about what this company was built on. A beat. He built it right. The room shifted. Not dramatically, a subtle recalibration, the way a room adjusts when it was prepared for one thing and received another. Celeste's breath stopped. Nathan wasn't reading from their script. The sentence didn't exist in any version of the speech she had approved, rehearsed, or signed off on. It was 3 words outside everything they had planned. He built it right, and those 3 words had just changed the geometry of everything that followed. She turned to Scott. What is he? I don't know, Scott said. His hand hovered over the production board. I can't cut the live feed without, then tell camera 2 to. But camera 2 was still on my face. and my face in this moment was not the face of a man being humiliated. It was the face of a man who had just heard something unexpected from someone he had stopped expecting anything from, and did not yet know what to do with it. I was crying, quietly, without performance. In the wings, Gerald Harmon's smile had not changed. He hadn't yet processed what was happening, but beside him his assistant Leo Marsh had gone very still. At the back of the stage, Maggie Cole stood up from her chair in the wings, one hand resting on the sealed envelope in her briefcase. Not opening it. Just touching it. Waiting. Nathan gripped the podium. He had said 3 honest words in a room that had been designed for something else entirely. The next sentence was going to define everything, what he was, what he chose, what he could still become. I held my breath. The camera was still on my face, and for once that was not the problem. Nathan's 3 words were still in the air when Harold Sinclair stood up. He didn't move fast. Harold never moved fast, which was part of what made him formidable. He rose from his seat in the VIP row, with the deliberate, unhurried authority of a man who had presided over federal proceedings for 2 decades and understood that the most powerful thing a person could do in a charged room was refuse to be rushed. He caught the MC's eye, raised one hand, and the MC, to her credit, read the room and stepped aside. Harold walked to the podium. Nathan was still standing there, one hand on the edge like a man who had jumped from a height and hadn't yet felt the landing. "Thank you, Nathan," Harold said gently but clearly. "I need one moment with the room." Nathan stepped back. He didn't resist. He looked like a man who had used the last of something and wasn't sure what came next. Harold turned to the audience. 600 people who had come for a gala and were getting something considerably more consequential. "My name is Harold Sinclair," he said. "I am the independent chair of the Whitfield Safe Care Board of Directors. I'm going to ask for the attention of everyone in this room for the next few minutes, because what you are about to hear affects every person who has a stake in this company as a partner, an investor, a donor, or a member of this community." He turned to the wings. "Ms. Cole." Maggie walked out. She was 55 years old, and she moved like someone who had never in her life been uncertain of her right to occupy a space. She carried her briefcase in one hand, and from it she withdrew a single sealed envelope, thick paper, the small silver wax seal catching the amber stage light like a coin. The room had gone the kind of quiet that outdoor spaces sometimes achieve just before weather changes, the kind where you can hear individual people breathing. Maggie set the envelope on the podium and broke the seal. The small sound of it, that dry, clean crack of wax separating, was somehow audible. Or maybe we all just felt it. "This document," Maggie said, her voice carrying without strain the voice of a woman who had addressed courtrooms and knew how to reach the back row, "is a trust governance provision established by Eleanor Whitfield in the final year of her life, prepared by this office, witnessed and notarized in February of 2023. I sat in the front row and heard Eleanor's name and felt my chest close around it like a hand. "The provision contains 2 sections," Maggie continued. "The first governs the conditions under which executive authority may be suspended, specifically in the event of documented financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, or a public declaration of separation from the founding governance structure." She paused for exactly 1 beat. "The second section is what Mrs. Whitfield called the redemption provision." From 2 rows behind me, I heard Gerald Harmon shift in his seat. The sound of a man who had just realized the script was not the one he'd read. The spotlight had narrowed without anyone touching the board, or maybe it just felt that way. The room had contracted around Maggie, and the papers in her hands, 600 people holding still, the way people hold still when they sense they are witnessing something that will matter later. Maggie read the first section in full. The legal language was dense, but she had a way of reading it that made the meaning land before the words, finished, like translation happening in real time. When she reached the second section, her voice shifted, not dramatically, just slightly a degree of warmth that her professional register didn't usually carry, the way a building holds a little of the day's heat after the sun goes down. The redemption provision, she said, establishes the following pathway. In the event that the successor executive voluntarily acknowledges financial misconduct, initiates full restitution of misappropriated funds, formally withdraws from executive authority, and submits to a period of independent oversight. The trust will not pursue criminal referral, and a structured path toward future participation in the company, in a non-executive capacity, will remain available. She looked up from the document. Her eyes moved just briefly to Nathan. Mrs. Whitfield's written instruction attached to this provision reads as follows. Maggie's voice was quieter now. Not soft, just human. This door is not a reward. It is a reminder that the people we love are capable of more than their worst decisions. Leave it open. Whether it is used is not yours to control. The room was absolutely silent. I pressed 2 fingers hard against my mouth. My eyes were burning. I was not going to make a sound in this room. But I was also not in control of whether the tears came, and so I let them come quietly, without wiping them, because wiping them would have been a performance. And this was not a performance. On the stage, Nathan was standing very still. His face had done something I had not seen it do in years. It had stopped working. The controlled expressions, the calibrated reactions, the mask that had been so well fitted for so long that I had sometimes forgotten it was a mask, all of it had gone slack. What was underneath was raw and young-looking and frightened. Celeste in the wings had taken 1 step backward, then another. Her hand was over her mouth. Gerald Harmon was very still in his chair, the posture of a man who has just seen a door he thought he controlled swing open from the wrong side. Harold Sinclair stepped to the microphone. On behalf of the board, he said, executive authority is temporarily suspended pending review effective immediately. This action is consistent with the governance provisions of the trust and the bylaws of this company. His voice was the voice of a man who had issued verdicts before and knew how to carry the weight of them. We will proceed. The room exhaled. Harold turned toward the wings. Ms. Harmon Whitfield. His voice did not rise. Please remain in the building. Council will need a word with you before this evening concludes. He did not wait for her response. He did not need to. Kevin Mercer had been in the technical booth since 7 o'clock. He had coordinated with Ray Delgado on the audio routing the previous afternoon, walking through the process, the way professionals do methodically, without drama accounting for every variable. The venue's speaker system was a 12-channel array. Playing a single audio file through it required 3 steps and about 45 seconds of lead time. Kevin had been ready since 8:30. When Harold nodded toward the technical booth, the signal they had agreed on the day before Kevin pressed play. Gerald Harmon's voice filled the room. Not loud, not theatrical, just present the way a voice is present when it comes through good speakers in a quiet room, intimate and inescapable, like someone speaking directly into your ear. 186 million over 18 months. By the time anyone traces it back, the trail ends at 3 shell entities incorporated in Delaware. Clean. A breath. Then Nathan's voice, careful and unhurried. And you're certain none of this loops back to me. And Gerald again, warm with confidence. Structurally impossible. Your name is 2 layers removed from anything actionable. The room had been still before. Now it was something past still, the specific crystalline quiet of 600 people processing something simultaneously and not yet knowing how to speak. I watched Gerald Harmon. The color left his face the way color leaves things in cold water, gradually, then all at once. He gripped the arms of his chair. His mouth opened slightly. He looked like a man who had built a very tall structure and had just felt it move under him. He pushed himself to his feet, whether to speak or to leave. I don't know. And then his legs gave. Not a dramatic fall, a slow, collapsing descent back into the chair, like a building settling, all the certainty going out of him at once. Celeste made a sound in the wings, small, involuntary. The sound of a person watching a fire reach something they hadn't intended to burn. I felt something move through me that I am not proud of. A cold, fierce satisfaction, the kind that lives in the same room as grief and is equally honest. I acknowledged it and let it pass. Then I looked at Nathan. His face was red now, eyes bright and wet. He was looking at the floor of the stage at some point between his shoes and the edge of the spotlight, and his chest was moving in the uneven rhythm of someone working very hard not to fall apart in front of people. I thought, there he is. There is the person I have been looking for. Diana Moss walked out next, and I was glad it was her Diana who delivered bad news without softening it, who believed that clarity was a form of respect. She carried a tablet and a remote for the LED screen. Behind her, Kevin had already loaded the timeline. "My name is Diana Moss," she said to the room. "I am the Chief Financial Officer of Whitfield Safe Care Technologies. What I'm about to show you is the forensic timeline of a transaction structure that was initiated within this company over the past 6 weeks." The LED screen behind her changed. The horizontal line appeared blue to orange to red. Layer 1. Diana said, her voice even and precise, "is a vendor payment network. 3 entities, Delaware Incorporation, same physical address, invoices, structured below the $50,000 automatic approval threshold to avoid triggering review." She clicked forward. Layer 2 is the transfer mechanism, fabricated service invoices for work that was not performed, used to move accumulated funds through a secondary holding structure. She clicked again. The red marker filled the screen. Layer 3 is the activation command, a single transaction input that initiates the release of the full amount, $186 million. This command requires 2 things. She looked out at the room. An executive password, and a biometric confirmation, a physical input that cannot be delegated, cannot be spoofed, and cannot be entered by anyone other than the credential holder at the moment of execution. Kevin's voice came through the speaker from the booth, reading from the credential log. Access timestamp January 18th, 11:47 p.m. Credential holder Nathan James Whitfield. Biometric confirmation verified. Nathan's hands came up and gripped the podium edge. The microphone picked up his breathing shallow fast, the breath of a man standing on a ledge who has just looked down. I stood up, not to speak, not to perform. I stood because I had been sitting for too long, and my son was 30 feet away and falling, and I did not know how to watch that without being on my feet. Nathan looked at me. His eyes were red. His face was open in the way faces are open when there is nothing left to protect. He looked, and this is the truest thing I can say about that moment, like a man who had finally run out of road and was standing at the edge of it, looking back at where the road began. I looked back at him. I did not smile. I did not nod. I just stood there, 63 years old, with 2 envelopes in my jacket pocket. And I let him see me, all of me, the grief and the anger and the love that had never in 38 years found a way to stop. Nathan's jaw worked. His throat moved. He turned toward the back of the hall. His eyes found Ray Delgado standing in the corridor entrance, motionless, pale, holding the battered leather case that carried his audio gear. Ray, who had a daughter in 7th grade and a truck payment on the 15th, and no interest in being relevant to anything large. Nathan looked at Ray for a long time. Then he looked back at me. His hands let go of the podium. The chaos behind that curtain didn't sound like chaos. Not at first. It sounded like a kettle just before it screams. I had stepped off the floor only 90 seconds earlier, just long enough to feel the heat of the stage lights leave my collar, when the hallway door behind the wings flew open, and a man I had only spoken to twice in my life came stumbling out like the building itself had spit him up. His name was Leo Marsh. He had been Gerald Harmon's personal assistant for the better part of 8 years, the kind of man whose tie was always knotted a half-inch too tight, who carried 2 phones in his jacket and never let either of them ring more than twice. The kind of man who in any other room would have been the first to fix what was wrong. Tonight he could barely stand. His face was the color of dishwater. His hands were doing something I had only ever seen in old men who had survived combat and woken up still inside it, opening, closing, opening, closing, finding nothing to hold. The moment his eyes locked onto mine, he broke. Not the polite, throat-clearing kind of crying men our age allow ourselves in public. The kind where the breath collapses first and the words come out gnawed. I don't want, please, Mr. Whitfield. I don't want to die for them. I am 63 years old. I have heard people beg in courtrooms and hospitals and driveways at 4 in the morning. None of it ever sounds like a performance. This didn't either. I took one step closer. Just one. Close enough to catch him if his knees folded far enough to keep him from feeling cornered. Leo, I said, and my own voice came out lower than I meant it. Tell me, all of it. He tried twice before he could speak. There's a clip, he whispered, his shoulders heaving. Celeste had it cut 3 days ago. It's edited to make you look it doesn't matter. If tonight goes sideways, they're going to push it out, and they're going to need a name at the bottom of the page. They were going to use one of the techs, the one who runs sound, the man with the cart of cables. He meant Ray Delgado, 41 years old. I had walked past him an hour earlier, and he had given me one of those tight, polite nods you give the man whose son is about to swallow the room. Leo kept going faster now, like the words had been holding the rest of him up. Gerald signed off on it. Nathan didn't even blink. I didn't move. But something inside my chest moved hard, the way a heavy door settles against a frame when the wind changes. My eyes burned. Not from grief this time. From the older, plainer thing that lives underneath grief and waits. Leo grabbed the edge of my jacket. The tendons in his wrist stood up like wires. Mr. Whitfield, they're going to do it tonight. Event 6.2, don't touch the innocent. I peeled Leo's fingers off my lapel, one by one, gentle but exact, the way you would lift a child's hand off a hot stove. Stand up, Leo, I said. If you fall back there, they'll say the old man pushed you. Stand. He nodded. He could not speak yet. The breath was still rebuilding inside him. Before I had finished, Maggie Cole rounded the corner with her phone pressed flat to her ear, her low heels striking the concrete like a metronome that had finally decided. She is 55 years old, my wife's old roommate from law school, and she does not run for anyone. Tonight, she was almost running. Thomas. She lowered the phone. Tell me what you need. 2 things, I said. First, Kevin. Kevin Mercer was already there, breathing through his nose like a man who had taken the back stairs 3 at a time. Logs are mirrored, sir. Backup pushed at 9:18. Nothing erasable on this side of midnight. Even if they kill the venue feed, I have the carbon copy. Diana Moss appeared a half-second later, and the first thing she did was meet my eyes, which is the part of her I have always trusted. I can freeze the operating account on your nod, Thomas, she said. Steady voice. But her wedding ring kept turning around her finger. Not yet, I said. If we freeze, they panic. If they panic, they reach for the cheapest thing in the room. I did not name him out loud. I did not need to. Ray Delgado was pressed against the wall like a man who had decided the wall was the only thing telling the truth tonight. 41 years old, the cuffs of his black venue shirt damp where he had wiped his palms over and over. His lips trembled, not the small tremor of cold, but the bigger one that comes when a man realizes other men have already chosen which of his bones will break. "Mr. Whitfield," he whispered, "I just pulled a mic cable, sir. I swear on my mother, I just pulled a cable." I crossed the corridor and laid one hand on his shoulder. My own hand was not steady. It had not been steady since Eleanor died, if I am honest. But tonight I needed it to look steady for him, and that is a different kind of hard. "Mr. Delgado, listen to me. Whatever happens out there in the next 30 minutes, no one puts your name on a piece of paper. You hear me?" He nodded fast 3 times. A tear slid clean down his jaw. I turned to Maggie and made my voice as low and as level as I could, because I have learned that some sentences only land when you refuse to raise them. "Maggie, if anyone in this building tries to drop this on an innocent man, we hammer it. Straight to the bench. Tonight." "Heard," she said. That was when I felt it, the prickle on the back of the neck, older than language. I turned my head. Through the gap in the stage curtain, Nathan had turned. The microphone was still in his hand, but he was no longer looking at the audience. He was looking at Ray Delgado, and I knew that look. I had given that look to balance sheets, to suppliers, to lawsuits I intended to win. It is the look a man gives a problem when he has already begun calculating the shape of its grave. Maggie's hand caught my elbow before I could move. "Thomas, eyes." I turned mine, but I never lost his. Through the seam of that curtain you could see almost everything and nothing the audience would ever see. Nathan had angled half a step away from the podium. The microphone in his right hand had begun to tremble in a way no audio engineer could mask. The stage wash had shifted to a colder blue while Harold Sinclair was speaking from the floor, and that color climbed up my son's jaw and made him look 10 years younger and 10 years more lost at the same time. Celeste came in from the wings the way a fox steps out of high grass. Her dress whispered against the canvas. She stopped one shoulder behind him, close enough that only the curtain would hear. "Nathan," her voice was a velvet wire, "look at me. Don't look at the screen. Look at me." He didn't. "Nathan, baby." She gripped his sleeve. Not the soft grip of a wife. The grip you use on a horse that has begun to remember the open gate. "They are setting you up. Right now. Out there. Don't say one more word until Gerald and I..." "Sell." The word came out of him like a stone dropped down a well. Not loud. "Final." She blinked. Her smile had been a craft project all night. A thing she kept rebuilding piece by piece, and for the first time I saw the cracks rise faster than her hands could glaze them. "Don't sell me," she hissed. "Don't you dare. I built this room. I built that crowd. I built the angle the camera is on you right now. Do not throw 13 years of work into a microphone because some old man..." "Sell, look." He tipped his chin. Half an inch, toward the corridor, toward Ray. She did. And I watched her see him. 41 years old, drained of color, both hands flat against the wall as if he were trying to hold the building up by himself. For 1 second only, Celeste's lower lip pulled inward. The producer trick of a woman recalculating a story she had already sold. Then her face shut again like a vault. "He's a stagehand," she said. "He's nobody, Nathan. They will eat him in a week and the news cycle will move." Nathan made a sound I had not heard out of him since he was 11 and our dog died. A short, dry laugh that wasn't a laugh. That, he said, is exactly the sentence that scares me. His other hand had begun to open and close at his side, the same useless rhythm I had watched in Leo Marsh 15 minutes earlier. Funny how the body of a guilty man and the body of a frightened one wear the same gloves. His eyes climbed back to the LED to his own credential glowing in red, then dropped finally to me. I did not move. I let him have my face. All of it. The grief he put there. the hope he had not yet earned. He swallowed once hard. The cords in his throat strained, and under his breath no microphone catching it. But the bones in his own chest, I saw his lips form the words, "If I don't take this, they will." The room had hushed the way old rooms do not, all at once, but in patches the way a frost takes a lawn. The amber wash returned to the stage. The blue drained off. And Nathan turned fully now away from his wife, away from the LED behind him, and looked down to where I was standing. His eyes had no edge left. I have spent 30 years arguing with that face boardroom's kitchen tables, the doorway of his college dorm at midnight. I had learned to read it the way a sailor learns a sky. Tonight, there was no weather in it I had not seen on him at 6 years old, lost in a department store, scanning every coat for the one that was mine. Maggie stepped beside me. Her low heels touched the parquet without sound. The silver-sealed envelope was no longer in her satchel. It was in her hand, edge up like a wedge. Celeste pushed forward from the wings. Her shoulder caught the curtain. "Wait, Mr. Sinclair, before we—" "Mrs. Whitfield." Harold Sinclair did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He had been the chairman of an independent board for 2 decades, and his no had outlived 4 CEOs. No one speaks again from this stage tonight unless they are invited. That includes you. The flush on her cheekbones spread fast all the way to her collarbone. Her hand on the curtain folded into a fist. Maggie spoke next into the hush, every consonant arriving exactly where she had aimed it. For the record, and on the record, the saving clause stands. Voluntary disclosure, restitution, resignation of executive authority, independent oversight. The gate is open until midnight. After midnight, the gate is locked and the matter belongs to the courts. Nathan's chest moved. Once. Twice. The microphone had begun to rest a little lower in his hand, as if it had decided it was not his anymore. I cleared my throat. The first sound I had let out into that hall all evening. "Nathan," he flinched. A small flinch, the shoulder a half-inch. "Look at me, son. Not the camera. Me." He did. The eyes were already there. "You can save yourself with the truth," I said, and the word truth caught in my throat, going up the way bread catches when you have eaten too fast. "You cannot save yourself with power. Not anymore. Not after tonight. There is one of those things I can still hand you. There is one of those things I never could." His mouth opened, closed, opened. "Daddy?" He had not called me that since he was 9. The word came out of him broken in 3 places, like a thing dropped on tile. Somewhere behind me, a woman in the 3rd row pressed both hands flat over her mouth. Celeste hissed his name. Harold Sinclair lifted one finger, and her sound died in the air. Nathan's eyes filled. He did not let the tears go, yet he was still that proud, but they stood in him like water at the lip of a glass. And then, for the 3rd time tonight, he did the same thing. Slow, deliberate, almost involuntary. He turned his head toward the corridor. He looked at Ray. It took him 28 minutes to walk back 9 feet. Most of those minutes he spent at the rim of the lectern, one hand braced against it, the other curled into a fist at his side. Maggie spoke twice more during that time, not to push him, only to keep the legal door propped open, the way a nurse keeps a respirator running on a patient who has not yet decided whether to come back. The audience did not heckle. The audience did not even shift. 600 well-dressed strangers held their breath the way only Southern crowds can, the kind of reverent hush that holds in a room like a hymn no one is singing. When Nathan finally stepped to the microphone, his hand shook so badly he had to switch it from right to left, and then back to right. The 3rd try, he just held the stand instead. Both palms. He opened his mouth. The first sound out of him was not a word. It was a gasp, short, ragged, the noise a man makes coming up from cold water. Then he wailed. I want you to understand something about that wail. It was not the cry of a man performing remorse for a camera. It was not the sob of a politician practicing humility. It was the noise an animal makes the moment it stops fighting the trap. Wet. Ugly. From a register, most grown men never let themselves touch in public. I was wrong. 3 words. They came out of him like blood from a split lip. The audience flinched in a single body. A glass somewhere in the back tipped against another glass and made a chime small and obscene in that hush. Celeste did not move. Her face had stopped making decisions. Her mouth held a half smile she had clearly forgotten to dismiss, and her eyes blinked too fast, the way a security camera blinks when a power line is failing. Maggie murmured low at my elbow, "Steady, Thomas." I had not realized I was leaning forward. I felt my own face go hot, then cold. The tears came up before I could decide what to do about them, slid down both sides of my nose and kept going. I did not lift my hand to stop them. I am not a man who cries in public. I am the man whose company built a device that lets old women fall safely. I am the man who buried his wife on a Tuesday and was back in a deposition on Wednesday because she had asked me to keep going. But I let those tears go. I let the camera have them. Not for sympathy, because what was happening on that stage was not a press cycle, not a brand event, not a quarterly report, and I needed every soul in that room to remember that a family was breaking in real time on purpose because no one else was going to break it for them. Nathan turned slowly until he was facing me alone. His shoulders were heaving. His mouth opened and shut like a fish in a hand. "Daddy," he said. Daddy, I." He held the breath. Then he let it out, the way men let out a confession in a hospital chapel at 3 in the morning, when the roof caves in and there is nothing left to bargain with. I activated the second tranche. His voice cracked on the word activated. He grabbed it back. I activated it. I entered the credentials. The hand on the biometric was mine, no one forced it. He stopped. His chest heaved once. I told myself I was gathering evidence. I told myself the recording would protect me, but I activated the transaction first. I built the exit before I decided whether I was really going to use the door. That is not the same as innocence. I know that now. The crowd made the sound a forest makes when the wind finally turns. Nathan rotated his face fully, not in sideways glances anymore, toward the corridor. "Don't put it on Mr. Delgado. Don't put it on Amber Ross in compliance. Don't put it on Diana. None of them touched the system. I did. The credential was mine. The hand was mine." In the corridor, Ray Delgado clapped both hands over his mouth as if he were trying to keep his heart from coming out. A noise escaped him anyway, half cry, half laugh, the sound a man makes when a sentence he has been carrying for an hour gets lifted off his chest by someone he will never be able to repay. Maggie stepped forward 1 step, the silver seal envelope opened now like a fan in her hand. "Voluntary disclosure on the record witnessed by counsel and by the chairman of the board." She turned her head a quarter turn. "Mr. Sinclair." Harold Sinclair rose from his chair, the way a judge rises from a bench, every joint deliberate, every motion older than this gala. "As chairman of the independent board," he said, "and pursuant to Section 11 of the Founders' Trust, I am suspending Mr. Nathan Whitfield from all executive authority, effective immediately. The CFO will retain signatory power under chairman oversight. The General Counsel will commence the cooperation protocol with state and federal regulators tonight." Celeste made a sound. It wasn't loud. It was the sound a glass makes when the hairline crack finally lets go a small exact shh that you only hear because the room has gone careful around it. She did not look at Nathan. She looked at her phone. The phone, mercifully for her, had no answers in it tonight. I stood there at the foot of the stage and watched my son, and I felt 2 things at once that no parent should ever be made to feel in the same minute. I felt the relief of a man who has just watched his child step away from a cliff he had been walking toward for years. And I felt the bone-deep grief of a man who has just watched his child step into a smaller, harder life because there was no other one left to step into. Nathan looked at me. The whites of his eyes were red. The whites of mine had stopped being white about an hour ago. "Daddy," he whispered, and the microphone caught it, because the room had gone careful around him too. "Do I still have a way to live?" Maggie answered before I could. "Backstage," she said into the microphone, with that lawyer's tone that gives an instruction, the shape of a courtesy. "We will continue this off the platform." The crowd let out the long exhale of a room that had been holding more weight than it knew it could carry. Harold Sinclair gestured the cameras down. 2 of them obeyed. The third, Scott Avery's third, kept its little red light on a beat too long, until Maggie crossed in front of it and said without lifting her chin, "Off, Mr. Avery." The light died. I walked Nathan off the stage by the elbow. He was lighter than I remembered. A grown man should not feel that light against a father's hand. The table was small and round, draped in silver linen, the way Eleanor used to drape the side table in our entryway every Sunday. On it sat 2 envelopes, one thick and pale, sealed in dark wax, one thinner, sealed in silver. We had carried them both into this building tonight. We would carry only one of them out. Nathan saw the thick one first. His eyes lit a child's light, the kind you cannot age out of, the kind a 40-year-old man's face still produces when his father reaches for the gift on the high shelf. "That one," he breathed. "Is that—" "Sit down, son." He sat. He had to. His knees had been promising to fold for an hour. I lifted the thick envelope. I broke the wax with my thumbnail, the way I had broken his mother's letters every December for 31 years. I read the first line. I read the second. Then I closed it again and set it face down on the silver linen. And the small, flat sound of paper meeting cloth was, I think, the loudest thing I have ever heard. Nathan's face did not understand. Dad, what is that?" "That," I said, "is the version of tonight where you keep the company." His mouth opened. "That is the version your mother and I drafted when you were 31 years old. The version where the founder steps aside and the son steps up. We kept it in a safe in the bedroom. I brought it tonight because, God help me, I wanted to believe I would still be handing it to you." The tears came. I did not stop them. I had stopped pretending an hour ago. "You have a life, Nathan." My voice held just. "You do not have a throne. Not because I hate you. Because power did something to you I did not see in time. And I will not hand you the rest of the gun and call that love." His face crumpled the way wet newsprint crumples. His knees gave. He grabbed the edge of the table on the way down, and his shoulders began to heave in long, ugly waves. For a moment, the only thing I could see in the world was the back of my son's head and the small bald patch his mother used to kiss when he was 3. I did not sit down with him. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But standing was the last fatherly thing I could give him in that minute. So I gave it. He sobbed once raw, then lifted his face. His mouth was wrecked. His eyes were a child's again. "Daddy," the word came out cracked, soaked. What would Mom think of me?" I did not turn on the television. I came in through the side door, set my keys in the chipped saucer where they had lived for 31 years, and stood at the kitchen island listening to the cold Savannah wind hunt for a way through the storm windows. Eleanor's gray wool scarf was on the chair where I had left it that afternoon. It still smelled of lily, faintly the way a church smells of candle wax 3 days after the wedding. The real wooden box sat on the table, not the decoy from the bedroom. This one. Cherry wood slightly warped on the lid where the heat of her old reading lamp had worried it for decades. I opened it. Her letter was on top. I had read it in fragments before, the way you read scripture when the floor is moving. Tonight I read it whole. "Tom, if you're reading this, it has happened, and I am sorry. You always saw the road before I did, and you never wanted to be right. Save him. The boy who fell asleep on your shoulder all the way home from Tybee Island is still inside the man. He is. But save him without giving him the keys. Power did not love our son. It made him into something I could not bend down to kiss anymore. Don't call that mercy, Tom. The clause has two doors. Use the second one. He will not forgive you tonight. He will in the end. Because you are his father, and because eventually every night ends. I love you. I am not gone. I am only very far down the hallway. I let the page rest against my chest the way you let a child rest there. My eyes burned wet again. I let them. You always knew, didn't you, Elle? I said out loud to my empty kitchen. My voice cracked on her name. You always saw the road before I did. The phone on the counter buzzed once. Maggie. Sinclair signed the suspension at 11:12. Cooperation protocol opens at 8 tomorrow. Get sleep, Thomas. M. I sent back 2 words. Thank you. Then I opened the thread to Ray Delgado and typed slowly with a thumb that had stopped pretending to be steady. Mr. Delgado, it is finished. No one will put your name on a piece of paper. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Sleep well. Thomas Whitfield. 3 dots appeared. They stayed for a long time. Then his answer came through and it was 4 words. Thank you, sir, really. I almost laughed. I almost sobbed. I did neither. I lifted the thick envelope, the version of tonight, where Nathan had kept the company, the version Eleanor and I had drafted, with so much hope you could feel the paper bend with it, and I slid it into the bottom drawer of the kitchen hutch. I turned the small brass key, not because I wanted to lock it away from him, because love cannot stand in for principle, because some night late I might forget that. The locked drawer would remember it for me. I walked to the window. Savannah was dark out past the live oaks, their Spanish moss moving the way old hair moves in a slow river. Somewhere on the other side of that dark, my son was being driven home in a car that no longer belonged to him. I let my forehead touch the cold glass. He chose to be a man, I whispered. Just too late to be a king. Then I closed Eleanor's box gently, the way you close a door on a sleeping child, and I went up the stairs to a bed that had been one half empty for 3 years. There is a thing I have learned late the way most fathers learn the important things. A story about family revenge is never really about revenge. It is about what a man chooses to keep when he is given the chance to crush someone he once loved. I had that chance. I did not take it. And I will not pretend that was easy or noble or even certain. It was only the second best thing in a room where the best thing had already burned down. I will tell you what I told myself on the drive home from that stage. Don't be like me. Don't wait until your son needs a courtroom before you tell him the kind of man you wished he would become. Don't disguise your stalling as patience. Don't mistake love for permission. If you have a quarrel with someone you raised, sit down at a kitchen table tonight, not next year. God knows we are not promised next year. If this story moved you, if you saw your own family in any of it, leave a word in the comments. Tell me how you would have answered Nathan's last question. Share this with the one person you keep meaning to call. And if you would like more stories that try to be honest about what families cost us, subscribe to the channel. There will be more. Thank you for staying with me to the very end. A gentle word before our next story. What you hear on this channel weaves fiction with hard truths told for the lessons inside them. If that is not what your heart needs tonight, please be kind to yourself and choose another. We will be here when you are ready.